The dress wasn't much, just a simple navy blue sheath I'd found at the back of a secondhand store, but I'd spent $12 I couldn't really spare to have it professionally dry cleaned for the occasion. It hung on the back of our bedroom door, a silent promise. I had already requested the day off from the diner, a minor miracle that required trading 3 consecutive weekend shifts with Maria. I had already imagined it 1,000 times. Sitting in that vast auditorium, my back straight, watching Samuel walk across the stage. I'd imagined the weight of the law degree in his hands, a weight I had helped carry for 3 long, exhausting years. My feet, which were throbbing even now in their worn-out sneakers, had paid for that degree in countless double shifts, in spilled coffee and scalding soup, in miles walked on chipped linoleum. My hands, stained with the permanent smell of bacon grease and industrial soap, had paid for it. We had paid for it. Don't come to my graduation. Samuel didn't look up from his phone when he said it. The words just left his mouth and hung in the air of our small living room, instantly curdling the smell of the meatloaf I'd just pulled from the oven. For a second, my mind refused to process them. It felt like a badly translated sentence, a piece of conversational shrapnel that couldn't possibly have been aimed at me. I was still holding the hot pan, the 2 oven mitts I wore both threadbare and scorched at the fingertips. "What?" I asked, my voice small. "I think the oven fan is too loud. I didn't hear you." This time, he sighed. It was a new sound he'd perfected over the last 6 months, a sigh of profound, intellectual burden, as if the sheer weight of his future success made any conversation with me a tedious chore. He finally locked his phone and tossed it onto the couch, the cushion groaning under the small impact. He looked at me, and his eyes were cold. Not angry, not sad. Just cold, like polished stones at the bottom of a river. I said, "I don't want you to come to the graduation, Haley." I thought that was clear. I set the meatloaf pan down on the stove with a metallic clank that felt too loud for the room. "Why?" "I already took the day off. The dress is... I thought we were celebrating." "We are not celebrating. I am graduating," he corrected, standing up. He walked to the tiny kitchen counter and poured a glass of water, his back to me. Every movement was precise, deliberate, as if he were already practicing for a courtroom. "Be realistic, Haley. Everyone there will be from families with money, with status. Judges, partners from major firms, their children. These are the people I've been networking with. These are my future." He took a long, slow sip of water before turning to face me. "I cannot have them meeting you." The words hit me in the chest, knocking the air out. "Meeting me? Sam, they've met me. At the beginning, remember? At that first-year picnic." "Exactly," he sneered, and the expression was so foreign on his face that I flinched. "And I've spent the last 2 years correcting that impression. A first-year mistake." "Correcting what impression? What are you talking about?" I could feel a tremor starting in my hands, a cold dread creeping up from the floor. "I don't want people to know you're just a waitress." He said it simply as a statement of fact, like telling me the sky was blue or that rent was due. Just a waitress. The same job that had paid for his expensive textbooks when his student loans were late. The same job that covered our rent when he quit his part-time library gig to focus on finals. The same job that put this very meatloaf on his plate tonight. The poison in those 3 words was so potent it made me dizzy. "Is that what I am to you?" I whispered, tasting the bitterness on my tongue. "After everything? After 6 years? Haley, you don't understand the world I'm moving into," he said, that awful, patronizing sigh returning. "Image is everything. Perception is reality. I cannot build the career I want, the life I want, while being associated with someone who serves pancakes for a living." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the meatloaf at his perfectly ironed shirt. I wanted to list every sacrifice, every bloody sock, every missed holiday, every dream of my own I'd packed away in a box under our bed so his could have room to breathe. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, reptilian coldness of his ambition. He was erasing me. Right here in our living room, he was taking the last 6 years and painting them over with white. I just stared at him, my mind hollow. "So what?" I finally managed to say. "What do you tell them? When they ask about you, about your life, do you just pretend I don't exist?" Samuel picked his phone back up from the couch. He checked the screen, his thumb scrolling. He was already somewhere else, in that new world of his. He was already gone. He looked up at me, his eyes empty of any recognition, any warmth, any memory of the man who used to kiss my hands and call them his lifeline. "It's cleaner this way," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I'll just tell them you're dead. An accident, a few years ago. It's better." He paused, then added as an afterthought, "So please, never contact me again." He turned and walked into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. I heard the click of the lock. I stood in the silence, my hand still resting on the cooling meatloaf pan. The smell of thyme and roasted onions filled the room, a grotesque mockery of a home. I had been erased. He hadn't just uninvited me from a ceremony. He had uninvited me from his life, and in my place, he had left a ghost. I leaned against the counter, the formica digging into my back, and I cried, silently, so he wouldn't hear me and be inconvenienced by the sound. Riverside Diner sits on the corner of 5th and Morrison, an old brick shoebox that smells permanently of bacon grease and coffee that has been on the burner a little too long. The vinyl on the booths is cracked, patched in 3 different colors of duct tape, and the jukebox in the corner has been stuck on a loop of 1970s rock for as long as I've worked there. The fluorescent lights flicker when it rains, which in this city means they flicker about 200 days a year. For 6 years, this diner was my kingdom. It was the first place I went after Samuel locked that door. I didn't even go to Emma's first. I just got in my car and drove, my tears blurring the red tail lights of the cars in front of me until I was parked in my usual spot behind the building, next to the overflowing dumpsters. My shift wasn't for another 12 hours, but I let myself in with my key. The silence of the dark diner was a comfort. I slid into the 3rd booth from the door, Professor Hendrix's booth, and just sat there, breathing in the familiar, heavy air. This place was more of a home to me than the apartment I shared with Samuel ever was. I knew every inch of it. The wobbly table in booth 6 that needed a folded napkin under its left leg, the precise angle to push the kitchen door so it wouldn't squeak, the grinding sound the ice machine made for exactly 3 seconds before it dispensed. More than the building, I knew the people. They were my real family, bonded not by blood but by shared exhaustion and the unspoken understanding of service work. Maria had been working the morning shift for 8 years. She was a small, wiry woman with a sharp tongue and an uncanny ability to read a customer the second they walked through the door. She could spot the ones who would run her ragged for pocket change and the ones who would complain about their food just to get it for free. "Never let them see you sweat, Mija," she told me on my first day, tying my apron for me. "And smile with your mouth, not your eyes. Save your real smiles for people who deserve them." She taught me how to carry a warning in a pleasant tone, an art form Samuel's new friends would never understand. Then there was Devin, who washed dishes on weekends. He was 20, putting himself through community college with a philosophy about manual labor. His hands were always red and raw from the hot water and industrial soap. "Every job teaches you something," he'd said one night, scrubbing a pot with furious energy. "Washing dishes teaches patience. It teaches you how to turn chaos into order over and over again. People who look down on this, they've never done it. They don't know the endurance it takes." He saw a dignity in the grind that Samuel, buried in his books about justice, had completely missed. And there was old Joe, the cook, who had been at the Riverside Grill for 30 years. He barely spoke, communicating in grunts and nods. But Joe saw everything. When I came in one morning after a long night of listening to Samuel stress about his torts exam, my eyes red and puffy, Joe had silently slid a piece of banana cream pie, my favorite, across the pass during my break. No words, no questions. Just an understanding that some kindness is best served with whipped cream and silence. These were the people Samuel was ashamed of. This was the work he'd called an embarrassment. I thought of him, in our apartment, surrounded by his stacks of important books, and then I thought of Joe, arriving at 5 a.m. every single day to prep for the breakfast rush. I thought of Maria, raising 2 kids on her own with the tip money she earned by balancing 6 plates on one arm. I thought of Devin, scrubbing pots while dreaming of a business degree. These people knew more about honor and hard work in one shift than Samuel would learn in his entire, polished career. The law students from the university down the street treated the Riverside like their second office. They'd camp out in the back booths for hours, nursing single cups of coffee, their textbooks and laptops spreading across the tables like a conquering army. They debated constitutional law in loud, arrogant voices, gesturing with highlighters. I moved between them like a ghost, just a waitress ghost. I refilled their water glasses while they argued about tort reform. I cleared their empty sugar packets while they discussed summer internships at prestigious firms. They never looked up. They never said thank you. They never learned my name, even though it was pinned to my uniform every single day. Samuel used to be one of them, but I convinced myself he was different. He'd seen me. He'd talked to me. Now, sitting alone in the dark diner, I realized the horrible truth. He hadn't been different at all. He had just been broke. I wasn't his partner. I was his patron. I was a convenience, a resource to be used until a better one came along. His new friends, the ones he was so desperate to impress, were the same ones who snapped their fingers at me for more coffee, who left me a $1 tip on a $40 bill. He hadn't just left me, he had joined them. He had crossed a line, and to make sure he could never be pulled back, he had to erase the person who knew where he came from. He had to kill me off. I sat in that booth until the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the greasy windows. The city was waking up. Soon, Joe would arrive, then Maria. The smell of coffee would replace the stale, nighttime air. The lights would flicker on. The routine would begin. I stood up, my legs stiff. I walked to the break room, found a clean apron, and tied it around my waist. My shift didn't start for another 2 hours, but I started making the coffee anyway. I met Samuel Thornton 3 years ago in the very booth I had just been sitting in. He came in late one Tuesday night during finals week, looking like a man shipwrecked on an island of legal textbooks. He was exhausted, pale and broke. I watched him from behind the counter as he sat in the back booth, counting out loose change on the table, his shoulders hunched with the specific, private tension of someone doing math they desperately wish had a different answer. He was trying to figure out if he could afford both coffee and food, and I could see the exact moment he realized he couldn't. He'd sighed, pushed the small pile of quarters and dimes to one side, and flagged me over to order just a black coffee. Maybe it was the way his hands trembled from caffeine and stress, or maybe it was the familiar, haunted look of someone running on fumes, but he reminded me of my younger brother trying to get through community college. I brought him the coffee, and 10 minutes later, I brought him a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. Mistake order, I lied, setting it down before he could protest. Kitchen made it for a ticket I rang in wrong. It'll just go to waste if someone doesn't eat it. He looked up at me, and his gratitude was so raw and genuine it almost startled me. Thank you, he'd stammered. You have no idea. I had an idea. I paid for the sandwich myself out of my tip money. We started talking. He told me about the pressure of law school, the competition, the constant, grinding fear that he wasn't smart enough or connected enough to make it in a field built for the rich and powerful. I told him about the diner, about the small satisfaction of making someone's day a little better. He listened. He actually listened, asking questions about Joe and Maria, laughing when I told him about Professor Hendrix's rigid morning routine. He didn't just look at me, he saw me. When my shift ended at 2 a.m., he walked me to the bus stop, even though it was 5 blocks in the opposite direction of his apartment. We were married 6 months later at the courthouse on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. Maria and Devin were our witnesses, Maria wearing her Sunday best, and Devin in a slightly too small blazer he borrowed. We couldn't afford a real wedding, not even a nice dinner afterward. We celebrated by splitting a slice of pie at the diner on the house from Joe. It didn't matter. We were in love, and we were convinced that our shared work ethic was enough to conquer any obstacle. We were a team. Those first few months felt like a true partnership. We lived in a cramped, third-floor walk-up above a laundromat that always smelled like warm lint and bleach. Our furniture was a collection of thrift store finds and items left on the curb. Our dishes were mismatched, and the bed frame was held together with duct tape and optimism. But it was ours. I'd come home from a double shift, my feet screaming, and he'd be at the tiny kitchen table, highlighter in hand, and he'd get up to rub my shoulders. I'd soak my aching feet in a bucket of hot water and Epsom salts while he read passages from his textbooks aloud to me, trying to make me understand the complex beauty of contract law. We whispered about the future we would build. He wasn't going to be a corporate shark, he'd promised. He was going to open his own practice, defend people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers, use his education to help people like us. I believed him. I believed in him so fiercely that his dream became my own. I was investing. When his student loans were delayed and rent was due, I covered it with the tip money I had been saving for new work shoes. I wore my old ones for another 6 months, the soles worn so thin I had to put plastic bags over my socks when it rained to keep my feet dry. When he needed a series of expensive bar prep materials that cost more than my monthly paycheck, I picked up every extra shift I could get. I worked holidays, weekends, doubles that bled one into the next, until I was a walking ghost of exhaustion. I came home one night, well after midnight, and peeled off my socks to find the blisters on my heels had burst during my shift. The white cotton was stained pink with diluted blood. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, cleaning the raw skin, and I remember Samuel coming in. He knelt, looked at my feet, and his eyes filled with what I thought was horrified sympathy. "Haley, I'm so sorry," he'd whispered, his voice thick. "I promise you, when I graduate, you will never have to work like this again. I will give you everything." I believed that, too. I taped up my wounds, put the same shoes back on the next morning, and went back to work. I was investing in our future. His success was our success. Now, sitting in the pre-dawn quiet of the diner, the memory of his promise was a physical pain, sharper than any blister. He hadn't just forgotten that promise. He had intentionally, cruelly inverted it. The feet that had bled for his education were now an embarrassment. The hands that had served thousands of customers to pay for his books were not to be seen in polite society. The woman he had promised to give everything to was now being told to vanish, to become a ghost, so that he could have everything for himself. He hadn't just broken a promise. He had broken the entire foundation our life was built on. He hadn't just forgotten my sacrifices. He had redefined them as a liability. The shift began so gradually that I convinced myself I was imagining it. It was somewhere in the middle of his second year, after he'd made it onto the law review and started clerking for a professor with connections to a major firm. The Samuel who needed me for emotional support and grilled cheese sandwiches began to fade, replaced by a version of him that was sleeker, harder, and spoke a language I didn't understand. He started using words like optics and leverage in casual conversation. He also started looking at me, for the first time, as if I were a problem to be solved. It started with the law school events. In his first year, he dragged me to the potlucks and mixers, holding my hand, proudly introducing me to his classmates as his wife. In his second year, the invitations dwindled. When a big networking reception came up, I'd bought a new, second-hand, blouse to wear. The night of the event, he came out of the bedroom in his new, tailored suit, one I'd paid for with my Christmas bonus money, and he looked at me with a critical eye. "You know, Haley," he'd said, straightening his tie, "it's probably better if you sit this one out. It's going to be incredibly boring. Just a bunch of old guys talking about appellate procedure. I'll be back late." I accepted it because I wanted to believe it. I told myself he was being considerate, that he was sparing me an evening of boredom. But then it happened again, and again. He would schedule study groups at our apartment, but only, I realized, on Friday and Saturday nights when he knew I had my busiest shifts at the diner. When I offered to request a different schedule so I could be home and maybe make snacks for his friends, he waved it off. "Don't be silly. It's fine. We're just grinding. You'd be bored." I was being quarantined, separated from his new, important life, relegated to the before picture he was trying to crop out. Then came the introductions. The few times I did end up in the same room with his new colleagues, the change was chilling. He would no longer put his arm around my waist and say, "This is my wife, Haley." Instead, he would stand a few inches away, his hands in his pockets, and say, "This is Haley. Just Haley." The absence of the word wife created a vacuum, an awkward, unspoken question that left me feeling like an undefined, embarrassing appendage. When a new classmate of his, a woman wearing a blazer that cost more than my car, asked me, "And how do you know Samuel?" he jumped in before I could speak. "Haley's a very old friend," he said quickly. "She's been an incredible support." Then he immediately pivoted. "Speaking of support, did you read the dissent on the Marbury case?" I was left standing there, my smile frozen on my face, suddenly demoted from partner to old friend. His social media, once full of goofy pictures of us at the state fair or cuddled on our lumpy couch, was sterilized. He systematically deleted the old photos, replacing them with carefully curated images. Samuel studying in the Gothic-style law library, a thoughtful expression on his face. Samuel in a suit, shaking hands with a smiling professor, the caption thanking him for his mentorship. Samuel at a coffee shop with his law review team, all of them looking intense and brilliant. When I asked him why he'd taken down the picture of us at our courthouse wedding, he'd sighed that heavy, tired sigh. Haley, employers look at this stuff. It needs to be professional. A picture of us eating corn dogs doesn't exactly scream future associate at a top-tier firm. The final, devastating proof came 2 weeks before the graduation incident. I'd left work early, a rare gift from Maria, and decided to surprise Samuel at the law library with his favorite snack, a turkey sandwich from the deli he loved. I was going to drop it off and leave, a simple, supportive gesture. I found him in a study corral, talking with 2 of his classmates, the woman in the expensive blazer and a man I'd never seen before. I was about to call his name when I heard the woman's question. So, Samuel, are you bringing a date to the graduation gala? Or are you still playing the lone wolf? I froze, hiding behind a tall shelf of books. I could see his profile. He smiled, a charming, easy smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Just focusing on my work, he said, leaning back in his chair. Honestly, I just don't have time for a relationship right now. Law school, you know. It's a jealous mistress. The man laughed. Good call. Plenty of time for that after you make partner. I stood there, my hand clutching the brown paper bag with his sandwich in it. The smell of turkey and rye bread suddenly made me want to be sick. I don't have time for a relationship. I was his wife. I was the one paying for the apartment he would sleep in that night. I was a secret, an inconvenience, a lie. I turned and walked away, my sneakers silent on the library carpet. I threw the sandwich in a trash can on the street. I went home, and when he walked in hours later, I was already in bed, facing the wall, pretending to be asleep. I didn't have the words to confront him, because what could I say? Why did you pretend I don't exist? I already knew the answer. I was just a waitress, and in his new world, I was already dead. I stood in the living room, staring at the locked bedroom door. The Thursday night meatloaf, the one I made because I knew he had a long night of studying ahead, was still sitting on the stovetop, radiating a warmth that felt like a mockery. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. My mind replayed his words, trying to find a different meaning, a loophole, an escape hatch. I'll say you are dead. Never contact me again. It was the calm, casual delivery that terrified me most. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was a strategic decision, announced like a change in his class schedule. My shock began to curdle, hardening into a cold, desperate need for him to take it back. I needed him to open that door, laugh, and tell me it was a sick, twisted joke, a symptom of his exam stress. I walked to the door and knocked, my knuckles rapping softly at first. Samuel, open the door. We need to finish this conversation. You can't be serious. I heard a muffled sigh from the other side, the sound of profound irritation. Haley, I have a contracts exam on Monday. This conversation is over, and it's not productive. Please, just go. Go where? I yelled, my voice cracking, the tremor in my hands turning into a full-body shake. This is my home. You can't just erase me and tell me to go. I banged on the door, harder this time. Open the door, Samuel. Talk to me. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. He stood there, his contract's textbook held open in one hand, a yellow highlighter in the other. His face was a mask of cold impatience. What part of this is not productive do you not understand? You're being hysterical. You told me you were pretending I'm dead. I whispered, the word dead feeling alien and sharp in my mouth. How am I supposed to become? How? How could you even think that, let alone say it? He set the book down on the small desk inside the bedroom, but he remained in the doorway, blocking my path. I thought about it because it's the simplest solution, he said, his voice dropping into that new, infuriatingly patient tone he used when explaining complex legal theories. Look, Haley, divorced is messy. It's a failure. It implies conflict, baggage, questions. People wonder what went wrong, whose fault it was. It's a blemish. But widowed. He almost smiled. That's tragic. It's clean. It generates sympathy, not suspicion. It makes me look resilient, strong. A man who has suffered a great loss and is still pushing forward to build a life. People admire that. It's a benefit, professionally. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees went weak, and I had to grab the doorframe to hold myself up. He wasn't just erasing me. He was profiting from me. He had weaponized my fictional death, turning it into a networking tool. He was building his career on top of my imaginary grave. A benefit, I repeated, my voice hollow. You're using my death. I'm using a narrative that works, he corrected, his eyes void of all emotion. It avoids awkward questions about why I'm married to someone inappropriate for my social circle. A terrible, burning question clawed its way up my throat. When? I asked. When did you start telling the story? He hesitated for only a second, checking his memory as if looking up a case citation. Around the middle of second year, I guess, when the summer internship interviews and networking events started getting serious. It was just easier. 18 months. The room spun. For 18 months, while I was working doubles, while I was soaking my bleeding feet, while I was meticulously budgeting my tip money to cover his bar prep courses, he was walking around his new, polished world as a grieving widower. People were offering him sympathy for a loss that never happened, praising his courage, admiring his resilience. I hadn't just been invisible, I had been a ghost, a prop in his one-man show. He turned from the doorway and walked to our closet. I heard the scrape of a zipper. He emerged a moment later with the duffel bag we'd taken on our honeymoon, a weekend in a cheap motel 2 towns over. He threw it on the bed and began pulling my clothes from the drawers, shoving them inside without care. My worn-out sweaters, my diner uniforms, the navy blue dress he would never see me wear. Samuel, what are you doing? You need to leave, Haley. Tonight, he said, not looking at me as he zipped the bag. I need to focus on my exam, and this is a distraction. Leave? Samuel, I live here. Half of this furniture is mine. I paid half the rent this month. Not anymore, he said, setting the duffel bag on the floor at my feet. A final, dismissive gesture. I will handle the apartment. I'm texting you my sister's address. You can stay there tonight. Emma knows we're separating. Separating. I laughed, a broken, ugly sound. That's the word you use? You just told me you've been pretending I'm dead for 1.5 years. He picked up his textbook, his attention already back on his future. And I need you to accept that. Do not come to the graduation. Do not contact me at school. Do not, under any circumstances, contact me at the firm I'll be joining. He finally looked at me, his eyes as cold and final as a judge's gavel. Our association is over. Please be gone when I come back out. He walked back into the bedroom and closed the door. The lock clicked into place. I stood alone in the living room, the overstuffed duffel bag at my feet. I picked up my phone and called my sister. Her voice was sleepy. Emma, can you come get me? My own voice was a stranger's, thin and hollow. I need somewhere to stay. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. They were slid under Emma's apartment door in a plain manila envelope with no return address, just the name of a high-priced law firm downtown. I found them when I woke up. I sat at her small kitchen table and opened them, my hand surprisingly steady. The grief had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clear emptiness. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The reason cited was a bloodless, bureaucratic lie. Irreconcilable differences due to lifestyle disparity. It was the legal equivalent of just a waitress. I signed my name on the line, my signature looking small and unfamiliar. I was signing my own death certificate. I walked to the post office that afternoon and mailed the papers back. I was officially, legally, and figuratively erased. Within a week of mailing the signed divorce papers, I moved into a studio apartment above a used bookstore on Maple Street. The rent was cheap, and the landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Chin, asked no questions when I handed him the deposit and first month's rent in cash, all the money I had. The apartment was small, with slanted floors and a radiator that clanked like a ghost in chains, but the windows faced east. Every morning, The sunrise would paint the peeling plaster walls in shades of gold and pink, and it felt like a promise. It was mine. The apartment I'd shared with Samuel had never felt like mine. It was just a holding bay for his ambitions, a place where I paid rent. This tiny room, with its lopsided kitchen and a closet too small for even my meager wardrobe, was a sanctuary. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, with finds from thrift stores and Curb Alerts. A reading chair with faded floral upholstery that was surprisingly comfortable. A small wooden table that wobbled until I folded a napkin under one leg, a trick I'd mastered at the diner. Mismatched dishes from the Goodwill bins, each one a small act of reclamation. I bought a row of small, stubborn plants for the windowsill and made it my mission to keep them alive. Their survival felt tethered to my own. There were no ghosts here. No navy blue dress hanging on the door, no textbooks cluttering the table, no cold, ambitious sighs filling the air. It was just me. I returned to the Riverside diner the Monday after I signed the papers. Walking through that door felt like coming home, but I was a different person than the one who had left. Maria was wiping down the counter when I walked in for the morning shift. She looked up, her sharp eyes taking in everything in a single, sweeping glance, the dark circles under my eyes, the new, hollow set of my shoulders, and the absence of a cheap wedding band I had worn for 3 years. She didn't offer pity. She didn't ask a single question. She just nodded once, pointed to the back. Aprons are clean. Table 6 needs coffee, and the couple in the window are ready to order. You good? I'm good, I said, my voice rough. Good, she replied, and tossed me a clean rag. Counter needs wiping. That was it. No intrusive questions, no whispers, just the solid, grounding routine of the work. Later, during the lunch rush, she noticed I hadn't eaten. She shoved a bowl of soup in front of me, the same tomato soup I'd once given Samuel. Eat, she ordered. You're no good to me if you pass out. Her kindness was practical and bracing, like ammonia, clearing my head and forcing me to stand. Devin, on the weekend, offered his own brand of philosophy from the dish pit. You know, Haley, he said, his hands deep in the suds. Dishes are great. Every single one starts out a mess, food stuck on, grease, stains you think are permanent. But you just keep working. You scrub, you soak, you put in the work. And eventually, it comes clean. Nothing stays ruined forever. You just gotta do the work. He was 20 years old, and he understood more about resilience than anyone I knew. Old Joe just silently made my favorite foods, sliding me extra pieces of pie and grilled cheese sandwiches he claimed were mistake orders. In their own ways, they were all helping me scrub my life clean. My sister, Emma, was my anchor. She showed up at my new apartment with 2 bags of groceries I hadn't asked for and a bottle of wine I desperately needed. She had every right to say, I told you so. She had met Samuel exactly 3 times and had, with her quiet, unnerving accuracy, described him as a man who looks at other people like he's shopping. She'd seen the shift in his social media, the careful curation, long before I had. But she never said it. Instead, she sat on my lopsided floor, helped me build a cheap bookcase from a box, and ordered us greasy takeout. We ate chow made out of white cartons and watched terrible reality television, making fun of the manufactured drama. Her sarcastic commentary made me laugh, a real, rusty laugh that hurt my chest, and it reminded me that not every bond was fragile. Some were built to last. The weeks turned into months. Summer's humidity gave way to the crisp, cool air of fall. The leaves on the trees outside my window turned from green to a fiery, defiant red, then drifted to the ground. I developed new routines. Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market. Sunday evenings were spent in the bookstore downstairs, Mr. Chin letting me browse for hours. I read novels about other people's problems, memoirs about survival. I worked. I paid my bills. I slept through the night in my own bed undisturbed. I was not happy, not in the way I'd once understood the word, but I was stable. And after the earthquake Samuel had caused, stability felt like a profound achievement. I had built a life that was small, but it was honest, and it was mine. I had, in my own quiet way, refused to stay dead. It was a Tuesday in October, almost a year to the day since Samuel had locked me out of our bedroom. The diner was quiet, caught in the late morning lull between the breakfast rush and the lunch crowd. I was wiping down the counter, lost in the familiar, hypnotic rhythm of the work. The scent of coffee and cinnamon was thick in the air. Outside, a cold rain had started, the kind that promised an early winter, and the diner's fluorescent lights flickered in their usual unreliable way. 8 months had passed since I had mailed the divorce papers. 8 months of building my small, stable life in the apartment above the bookstore. The raw, gaping wound of Samuel's betrayal had finally scabbed over, leaving a tight, puckered scar that only ached when the weather turned, or when I let myself remember. 2 law students were camped out in the back, in the same booth Samuel had once claimed as his own. I'd been refilling their coffee cups on autopilot for the last hour, their conversation a meaningless drone of legal jargon I'd trained myself to ignore. They were the new generation, just as arrogant and oblivious as the last. I approached their table with the coffee pot, my mind already on the lunch prep Joe would need help with. "Did you get your invitation to Samuel Thornton's wedding?" one of them asked, tapping his laptop screen. My hand froze. The coffee pot hovered over the first student's empty cup, my arm suddenly disconnected from my brain. A few hot, dark drops splashed onto the Formica table, sizzling quietly. I didn't move. Samuel Thornton. Wedding. The 2 words collided in my head, a brutal impact. "Yeah, I just came in," the other student replied, not looking up from his textbook. "It's going to be huge." "Of course it is. Did you see who he's marrying?" "Right. Victoria Ashford." "Can you imagine?" the first one said with a low whistle. "Her dad is Judge Ashford. Like, appellate Judge Ashford. That's not just marrying up, that's marrying into a different stratosphere." I set the coffee pot down on the table with a thud, the glass clanking against the heavy ceramic mug. Both students finally looked up at me, annoyed by the interruption. "Sorry," I mumbled, my voice sounding distant. I grabbed a rag from my apron pocket and began wiping up the small spill, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the cloth. The second student, oblivious, just continued. "Samuel really landed on his feet. He deserves it, though. After what he went through. That guy is all about resilience." "Totally," the first one agreed, nodding with false solemnity. "Such a tragic backstory. It's wild, right? Imagine your wife just dying. Like, right in the middle of your first year." "Brutal." The second student leaned in. "I heard it was a car accident. Super sudden. That's why he's so intense, you know? He's channeling all that grief into his work. Honestly, it's kind of inspiring." The first one laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Yeah, well, the whole dead wife thing definitely got him noticed. Tragic, yeah, but it makes for a hell of a story. And now he's marrying a judge's daughter. He's set. Good for him, upgrading like that." I couldn't breathe. The air in the diner felt thick and toxic, coating my lungs. Upgrading. The whole dead wife thing. He hadn't just used the lie to get rid of me. He had kept it. He had cultivated it. It was his brand. He had built his new life, his new prestigious job, and his new, powerful fiancée on the foundation of my grave. This Victoria Ashford, this judge's daughter, was marrying a widower, a tragic, resilient hero. She was in love with a man whose entire public identity was built on my non-existence. I grabbed the coffee pot and straightened up. The students had already dismissed me, turning back to their laptops, their brief acknowledgement of my existence over. I walked back toward the kitchen, my feet moving on their own. Each step was a shock, my sneakers hitting the floor, reminding me that I was solid, that I was real. I wasn't dead. I was here. I was breathing. I pushed through the squeaking kitchen door. Old Joe was at the grill, flipping burgers for the first lunch order. Devin was in the back, the rhythmic scrape of a scouring pad against a pot the only sound. "Haley, you okay?" Joe grunted, not turning around. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I leaned against the stainless steel counter, the cold metal a shock against my suddenly hot skin. I looked down at my hands, still clutching the coffee pot. They were red from the hot water, the knuckles chapped, the nails cut short. They were the hands of a waitress. They were the hands of a woman who had worked until her feet bled to pay for the future of a man who was now, at this very moment, being celebrated for surviving her death. A cold, quiet rage, so profound and so deep it felt less like an emotion and more like a chemical change in my blood, began to rise. He didn't just want me to disappear. He needed me to stay dead. I finished my shift on autopilot, my body moving through the familiar tasks while my mind operated on a separate, colder frequency. I smiled at customers, I refilled coffees, I balanced plates, and all the while, the words echoed in my head, the whole dead wife thing. When I finally clocked out, I walked home in the cold rain, letting it soak through my thin jacket. The physical chill was grounding, a necessary contrast to the icy fire burning in my chest. This wasn't the hot, messy grief I'd felt when he first kicked me out. That was a wound. This was a weapon. I got to my apartment, locked the door, and sat at my wobbly kitchen table. For a long time, I just listened to the clanking radiator and the sound of the rain against the window. Then, I opened my old laptop. It whirred to life, slow and struggling. I hadn't searched for his name, not once since the divorce. I had practiced a strict, painful avoidance, believing that moving forward meant never looking back. Now I understood. You can't move forward when someone has built their entire future on top of your grave. I typed Samuel Thornton into the search bar. His professional life bloomed on my screen like a toxic algae. His LinkedIn profile was first. Associate at Morrison & Wells, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. His photo was new, taken by a professional. He looked confident, successful, and content. His bio was a masterpiece of curated humility, mentioning his passion for justice and his personal understanding of loss that drove him to fight for those who can no longer fight for themselves. Then I found his Instagram, which was public. It was a digital memorial, a carefully constructed shrine to his own resilience. I scrolled, my stomach tightening with each image. A photo of him running a marathon, the caption, channeling grief into gratitude. Every mile is a reminder of the strength we find after loss. A picture of a single candle in a dark room, posted on the anniversary of our courthouse wedding. 3 years. Some lights never go out. The comments were a cascade of sympathy and admiration. You're an inspiration, Sam. She would be so proud. In awe of your strength. I found the alumni magazine article the law students had mentioned. Rising Star, how personal tragedy shaped one graduate's approach to justice. The article detailed his remarkable journey, balancing academic excellence with the crushing, sudden death of his young wife, Haley, in a tragic car accident during his first year. He was quoted directly, "When you lose everything, you learn what truly matters. My late wife always believed in helping others, and I see my work as a continuation of her spirit." I felt the blood drain from my face. He had stolen my name, my memory, and even invented a personality for my ghost, a benevolent, inspiring saint whose only purpose was to make his story better. Finally, I found Victoria Ashford. Her profile was also public, a bright, glossy diary of elite society. Pictures from charity galas, sailing trips, and finally, the wedding planning. Her, in a couture bridal salon, champagne in hand. A picture of the venue, the sprawling, impossibly green Ashford estate. And then, a photo of her and Samuel, him kissing her forehead. Her caption, "I never thought I would find a love like this. To be chosen by a man who has known such profound loss and has come out the other side with such a gentle, powerful heart. I am the luckiest woman in the world. I can't wait to build a life with you and to honor the memory of the love that shaped you." That was the moment the ice in my veins solidified. Victoria was a victim, too. She was in love with a fabrication, a tragic hero who didn't exist. Samuel hadn't just built his career on this lie. He was building an entire marriage on it. This wasn't just about my past. It was about their future. He was a con artist, and his lie was about to be sanctified by a judge and celebrated by the city's elite. A cold, precise clarity settled over me. This was not about revenge. Revenge was messy. This was about a correction. This was about truth. This was, as I'd thought in the diner, about refusing to stay dead. I opened a new document and began to work, my fingers flying across the keys. I cross-referenced Victoria's posts with public records. The Ashford estate, the Saturday. The wedding coordinator's name was tagged. The florist. The catering company. I found the main switchboard for Morrison & Wells. I found the name of the managing partner Samuel had tagged in a thank you post. I worked all night. By 4 a.m., I had a list of 10 names and 10 phone numbers. The key players, The people whose belief in his story held the whole rotten structure up. I created a new email account, something anonymous, untraceable. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't call Samuel. I didn't call Victoria. I called the main office of the Ashford estate and asked to speak to the wedding coordinator. When she answered, her voice bright and professional, I kept my own voice calm, pleasant and slightly confused. "Hi," I said. "My name is Haley Thornton, and I'm just calling to confirm the vendor meal choices for my husband, Samuel Thornton's, wedding. I think there might be a mix-up on the invoice he sent me." There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I had just become the ghost in the machine. Saturday arrived cool and clear, a perfect, brilliant autumn day. The kind of day photographers dream about, with a high, cloudless sky that made the turning leaves look like bits of stained glass. I drove my rattling 10-year-old Honda to the Ashford estate, parking across the street in a small public lot that served a walking trail. I was hidden by a large oak tree, but I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the long, winding driveway and the manicured lawn where the ceremony was being set up. I was wearing the navy blue dress. It felt right. It was the dress I had bought to celebrate his achievement, and I was, in a way, still doing that. I was here to mark the final, spectacular culmination of his ambition. The estate was everything I had imagined and more. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement. Old stone, covered in ivy, with gardens so perfect they looked unreal. Staff in crisp black and white uniforms moved with quiet efficiency, setting up hundreds of white chairs, adjusting floral arrangements that cost more than my apartment's rent. A string quartet was warming up on a small dais, their notes drifting across the lawn like butterflies. This was his new world, a world so opulent it didn't even seem real, built entirely on the foundation of a lie. I had made 3 more calls on Friday. One to the receptionist at Morrison & Wells, asking to be transferred to HR to update my spousal insurance benefits for Samuel Thornton. One to the florist, inquiring if the groom's first wife memorial arrangement I'd requested had been added to the order. And the final, most precise call, to the personal assistant of Judge Ashford himself, introducing myself as Haley Thornton and asking to confirm the post-ceremony family-only photo schedule. Each call was a small, perfectly placed charge, timed to detonate not on impact, but in the confusing, chaotic hours leading up to the ceremony. At 12:45 p.m., the guests began to arrive. Black sedans and luxury cars rolled silently up the drive, discharging men in tailored suits and women in elegant, windswept dresses. I watched them, these people who mattered. I recognized Samuel's law firm partners from his Instagram. I saw Judge Ashford and his wife, Catherine, greeting people with the practiced, confident smiles of people who owned the world. Then, at 1:15 p.m., Samuel arrived. He stepped out of a limousine with his groomsmen, and my breath caught. He looked incredible. Confident, handsome, his tuxedo perfectly tailored. He laughed, shaking hands, clapping his friends on the back. He was the image of a successful, resilient widower, finally getting his happy ending. The music began at 1:30 p.m. The guests settled. Samuel took his place under the massive floral arbor, smiling, checking his watch. He looked calm, triumphant, a king surveying his new kingdom. And then his phone rang. I saw it clearly from across the street. His smile faltered, replaced by a flash of pure irritation. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the phone, glanced at the screen, and declined the call. He slipped it back, smoothing his jacket, his composure restored. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time, his frown was deeper. He pulled it out, stared at the screen, and his jaw tightened in a way I recognized. That was his "I'm losing control" look. He declined it again, more forcefully, and shot an apologetic glance at the groomsman beside him. Before he could even put the phone away, it rang a 3rd time. A different ringtone, I noted absently. Louder. He stepped back from the altar, holding up a finger to the officiant, his composure cracking. He answered it, pressing the phone to his ear. I watched his body language transform. His shoulders hunched. His free hand went to his hip. He gestured sharply, his face turning from irritation to a pale, controlled panic. As he was hissing into his phone, I saw Catherine Ashford, the bride's mother, in the front row. Her own phone was pressed to her ear. Her perfectly composed face was a mask of utter confusion. She stood up, mid-call, and began walking quickly toward the altar, her heels sinking into the soft grass. She reached Samuel just as he was ending his call, and she immediately began speaking to him, gesturing furiously at her own phone. Samuel shook his head, his hands making placating gestures. But it was too late. The infection was spreading. A man I recognized as Richard Morrison, the firm's senior partner, stood up from the third row. He pulled out his own phone, looked at the screen, and then at Samuel, his expression unreadable. He began walking toward the altar. The wedding coordinator, a young woman with a headset, was suddenly running, actually running, across the lawn, her tablet clutched in her hand, her face white with terror. The string quartet, sensing the chaos, had stopped playing. The sudden, heavy silence was filled with the sound of whispers erupting through the crowd. Guests were turning, checking their own phones, which were now buzzing with the fallout. The texts, the confused messages. Who is Haley Thornton? Did you get a weird call about insurance? Why is a woman claiming to be his dead wife calling the judge's office? And then Victoria appeared. She emerged from the manor in her stunning white gown, ready for her entrance. She took 3 steps onto the lawn, her face glowing, and then she stopped, her smile collapsing. She saw not a serene ceremony, but a panicked cluster of her mother, her future husband, his boss, and the wedding planner, all in a state of open crisis at the altar. She gathered her dress and walked quickly, almost running, toward them. "What is going on?" I could almost hear her voice carry across the lawn. She grabbed Samuel's arm. He turned to her, his face slick with sweat, his mask of success completely gone. He was just a terrified boy in a tuxedo. He was stammering, trying to explain, trying to contain the lie. But the lie was too big. It was everywhere. It was in everyone's pocket. I watched Victoria's face as she listened. I watched the dawning comprehension, the confusion hardening into a horrifying, sickening realization. She stepped back from him, one hand going to her mouth. She looked at her mother, then at her father, who was now standing, his face a thundercloud. She looked back at Samuel, this stranger at the altar, this man who had built their entire relationship on a dead woman's ghost. That was enough. I had seen enough. The truth was here, an uninvited guest, and it was now making its way down the aisle. I didn't need to see the rest. I didn't need to hear the apologies or the accusations. I had done what I came to do. I had refused to stay buried. I turned the key in the ignition. My small car started with a quiet rumble. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw Victoria turn her back on Samuel and walk, fast, back toward the manor, her bridesmaids trailing behind her like a royal guard. The perfect wedding, built on the perfect lie, was collapsing in on itself. I drove away, my hand steady on the wheel, the navy blue dress feeling, finally just like a dress. The notification popped up on my phone screen on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 1 year after the wedding that wasn't. It was a calendar reminder I had set 4 years ago and had never bothered to delete. Anniversary. 6 years since I had stood in that dusty courthouse, holding a small bouquet of grocery store daisies, with Maria and Devin as our witnesses. 6 years since I had promised my life and my labor to a man who had, in turn, declared me dead for convenience. I stared at the 2 words on the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the dismiss button. The old, familiar ache was gone. In its place was just a quiet, neutral curiosity, the way you might look at a scar from a childhood injury you barely remember getting. I dismissed the notification and finished tying my apron. I walked out of the back office, my office now, onto the diner floor. "Morning, Haley," Maria called from the coffee station, where she was lining up clean mugs. "Big order from the construction site, down the street, just came in. They need 20 breakfast sandwiches, stat." "On it," I said, grabbing a stack of order tickets. "Devin, you good on Pratt? Joe's gonna need backup on the line." "Got it, boss," Devin called from the walk-in. I smiled. Frank, the diner's owner, had promoted me to assistant manager 3 months ago. The pay was better, the hours were steady, and for the first time in my life, I had health insurance and a small, growing savings account. It was a modest achievement by Samuel's standards, certainly not something you'd write about in an alumni magazine. But it was real. It was mine. And it was built on 6 years of hard work, not a single lie. Emma had, of course, given me the full report on the fallout from that day. She'd heard it through her friend who worked at the courthouse, who'd heard it from a clerk who'd been at the wedding. The ceremony had, shockingly, gone forward. After an agonizing 90-minute delay, during which Samuel apparently confessed everything in a desperate, panicked whisper to the Ashfords in the estate's library, a decision was made. Calling it off would be a bigger scandal, a public humiliation the judge refused to endure. So Victoria, her face pale and her eyes like glass, had walked down the aisle and married the man who had been revealed as a sociopathic liar. But it was a victory that was also a prison. "The marriage is a sham," Emma had reported, sipping her coffee weeks later. "Everyone knows it. They live in the same house, but that's it. She has him trapped. And Judge Ashford? He didn't fire him or have him disbarred. He did something smarter. She leaned in. He let Samuel keep his job at Morrison and Wells. But he made a few quiet calls. The firm knows. Everyone knows. Samuel's career is over before it began. He stalled, a pariah in a $1,000 suit. They're not giving him a single important case. He's the character risk. He's trapped in the exact world he lied to get into, and now he can never leave. That night, on what would have been my 6th anniversary, I did something I had never done. I made a reservation for one at Marcella's, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown that Samuel and I used to walk past, him pressing his hand to the glass and whispering, "Someday, Haley, when I make partner." I walked in alone, wearing a new black dress I'd bought with my first manager's paycheck. The hostess seated me at a small table by the window. I ordered a glass of expensive Cabernet, the kind that cost $20 a glass. I sat there, sipping the rich, dark wine, and looked out at the city. The lights were sharp and clear in the cold autumn air. I felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. I thought about Samuel, probably at some cold, silent dinner with his wife, Victoria, both of them performing the lie for the public. He had gotten the impressive job, the powerful wife, and the beautiful house. He had everything he'd ever wanted, and it was all worthless. I had been erased from his story, but he hadn't understood. Being erased from someone else's story doesn't mean you cease to exist. It just means you're free to write your own. He had tried to turn me into a ghost, a tragic footnote to make his own narrative more compelling. He dismissed me as just a waitress, someone without value, someone who served others. And in the end, I had served him one last thing, the truth. A cold, hard, indigestible order that he could never send back. The waiter brought my pasta, a beautiful, steaming plate of food I didn't have to cook, that I hadn't paid for with bleeding feet. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. I was not a ghost. I was not a tragic backstory. I was Haley Brennan, assistant manager, sister, friend, and a woman who had, against all odds, kept her small, stubborn plants alive on the windowsill. I had survived. I had rebuilt. And I had done it all without a single lie. I finished my wine and ordered dessert, a rich tiramisu. When the bill came, I paid it in cash and left a generous tip. I walked out into the cold October night, my head held high. I was not invisible. I was not dead. I was, finally, completely, and inconveniently alive. I raised my hand, as if holding a glass, and made a small, silent toast. Not to him, not to what we'd lost, but to me, the ghost who had learned to live again.